The crack of bone cut through 500 voices like a gunshot. The training yard went dead silent. Master Sergeant Ethan Knox, decorated war hero, 18 years of combat, was on the ground screaming into the dirt, his leg folded in a direction that made grown men turn away. And standing over him, breathing steady hands at her sides, was a Navy SEAL who barely cleared 120 pounds. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just looked down at the most feared man on base, like she'd already known this moment was coming. And she'd been waiting 6 days for it. If this kind of story moves you, real courage, real consequences, real truth, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning. Part 1. The woman nobody took seriously, Kanek. Fort Vanguard didn't have a welcome committee. What it had was a reputation. Any soldier who transferred in got the same unofficial briefing within the first 24 hours. Not from a commanding officer. Not from an orientation packet. From the person in the bunk next to them, spoken low, after lights out, like it was classified information. There's one rule here that matters more than anything in the handbook. What's that? Don't end up on Knox's radar. Master Sergeant Ethan Knox had been at Fort Vanguard for 11 years. In those 11 years, the base had cycled through 4 different commanding officers, 2 major reorganizations, and 1 full Pentagon audit. Knox had outlasted all of it. He didn't just survive those transitions, he grew stronger through them. Every time new leadership came in, Knox was the one who briefed them on how things worked, who the players were, which soldiers were worth investing in, and which ones were problems waiting to happen. He had 17 commendations on his service record. He had the kind of handshake that made generals remember his name, and he had a very specific hobby that nobody in his chain of command ever formally acknowledged. He broke people, not in the way that hard training breaks people, not the productive kind of suffering that turns raw recruits into reliable operators. Knox had a different kind of breaking in mind. He went after confidence. He went after dignity. He found the thing a soldier was most proud of and systematically took it apart in front of an audience because Knox understood something fundamental about power. It isn't enough to win. The people around you have to watch the other person lose. And for the past 4 years, his favorite targets had been women. Female soldiers at Fort Vanguard learned the pattern quickly. First, Knox would acknowledge them publicly, which felt like a compliment until you understood what came next. Then would come the subtle undermining during joint training exercises. Corrections delivered at maximum volume. Comparisons to male counterparts made casually, like he was just being honest. And if a woman pushed back, if she showed any resistance at all, Knox escalated. He had driven 3 female lieutenants to request transfers in the past 18 months. 2 of them had left the military entirely. The base knew. The officers knew. Command knew. And as long as Knox's unit kept posting the numbers they posted, no one was going to spend political capital making his life difficult. That was the environment Lieutenant Ava Mercer walked into on a gray Tuesday morning in October. She arrived alone, which was the first unusual thing. Joint Special Operations transfers typically came with a small support team, at minimum a liaison officer. Ava came with a single duffel bag slung over her left shoulder, a manila folder of transfer documents under her right arm, and the kind of stillness around her that felt less like calm and more like restraint. The soldier at the intake desk, a young specialist named Darren Cole, looked up from his computer and then looked again. "Lieutenant Mercer?" "That's me." Cole glanced at his screen. "Navy SEAL, DevGru." "Correct." He was quiet for a moment, not because he was processing the paperwork, because he was trying to figure out how to say what he was thinking without saying it out loud. Ava watched him work through it. "Something on your mind, specialist?" Cole cleared his throat. "No, ma'am. Just, we don't get a lot of DevGru transfers, and you're the first—" He stopped himself. "Female," Ava said flatly. "You can say the word." "Yes, ma'am." She set the folder on his desk. "I'm here for the Joint Special Operations Integration Program. 6 weeks. You need my biometrics blood type and emergency contact on file. That's my sister Mara Mercer numbers on page 3. Cole started typing. And your bunk assignment has you in Building C with the female officers. That works. Do you need someone to walk you over? Ava looked at him with the kind of patience that had nothing soft in it. I've been to 12 countries and 4 active combat zones specialist. I think I can find a building. Cole didn't say anything else. She signed the last form, picked up her duffel, and walked out. And that was it. That was the entrance. No fanfare, no announcement, no moment where the whole base paused and took notice. But someone noticed. Knox was crossing the parade ground when he saw her come out of the intake office. He didn't know who she was yet. What he registered first was posture. Because Ava Mercer walked like someone who had never once in her adult life thought about taking up less space, and yet somehow occupied exactly as much as she needed, and not a centimeter more. He asked the soldier walking beside him, "Who's the woman coming out of intake?" The soldier checked his tablet. "Transfer from Naval Special Warfare. Lieutenant Mercer. She's here for the integration program." Knox was quiet. "SEAL," says DevGru. Knox watched her until she disappeared around the corner of Building C. He didn't say anything else, but something shifted in his expression, something that people who knew him well would have recognized immediately. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't interest. It was the specific look of a man who had just identified his next project. Month. Ava's first official day in joint training began at 0530. She was already on the track at 0500. She wasn't warming up. She was just running. Methodical measured the kind of pace that doesn't look impressive until you track it across an hour and realize she hasn't slowed down by a single second. Sergeant First Class Pete Okafor was the first person to actually introduce himself. He found her at the water station after her second mile and held out his hand. "Okafor, I run training logistics for the integration program." She shook it. "Mercer." "Yeah, I know. Word moves fast here." He studied her for a moment. "You eat breakfast before a run. Always." "Good. A lot of operators think they can gut it out on empty. I respect people who understand nutrition." He paused. "I'm going to give you a piece of advice, Lieutenant, and I want you to understand it comes from a place of genuine respect and zero condescension." Ava opened her water bottle. "Go ahead." "Knox is going to come at you." She drank, said nothing. "I don't know if you've heard the stories yet, but they're all true. He has a history with female soldiers here, and your credentials are going to make it worse, not better. DevGru is going to feel like a direct challenge to him." Ava lowered the bottle. "What do you recommend?" Okafor seemed to have expected her to dismiss the warning. He took a breath. "Keep your head down. Don't outperform publicly. Give him nothing to grab onto." Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "With respect, Sergeant Okafor, that advice has a flaw." "What's that?" "It only works if Knox is primarily threatened by performance. But if what he actually wants is control, then it doesn't matter what I do. He'll find a reason. The quieter I am, the more he'll push because quiet people don't fight back, and that's what he's looking for." Okafor stared at her. "So you're going to do what exactly?" Ava put the cap back on her water bottle. "I'm going to run my program. I'm going to do my job. And I'm going to let him make whatever choices he's going to make." She went back to the track. Okafor watched her go, and for the first time in a long time at Fort Vanguard, he felt something he couldn't immediately name. It took him a minute to identify it. It was hope. Small, cautious, and fragile, but hope. Keg. Knox made his first move on day 2. Ava was in the middle of a combat readiness evaluation alongside 8 other soldiers when Knox walked into the training bay. He wasn't scheduled to be there. Everyone in the room knew that, and everyone in the room kept their eyes forward because acknowledging the irregularity would have required acknowledging why it was happening. Knox took a position near the evaluator's station and crossed his arms. He didn't say anything for the first 12 minutes. He just watched. Ava went through the first 3 stations without any change in pace. Obstacle course segment, weapons qualification, tactical problem solving. On the 4th station, a controlled sparring assessment. Her partner was a ranger captain named Delgado who outweighed her by 60 pounds. She put him on the mat in 47 seconds. Not rough, not dramatic, just efficient. A redirection of his momentum a leverage point, and Delgado was looking at the ceiling wondering what had happened. Knox spoke for the first time. Lucky. His voice carried across the bay without effort. He had a voice built for that. Every word hit like a PA announcement. The evaluator hesitated. Ava helped Delgado up. Delgado, to his credit, said quietly, "Good move, Lieutenant," and went back to his position. Knox walked closer. "Want to explain what that was, or do we just call it luck and move on?" Ava turned to face him. "It was a standard rotational hip throw with a wrist lock exit, covered in Marine Corps Close Combat Training Level 3, also standard in the SEAL Combatives curriculum." Knox looked at Delgado. "You got taken down by that?" Delgado's jaw tightened. "She's fast, Sergeant." "She's small," Knox said. "Small and fast, like a rodent." Nobody laughed. That was the thing people noticed later when they recounted that moment. Knox expected laughter. He always got laughter. The silence that followed was so unexpected that for just a half second his expression flickered. He recovered immediately. "Continue the evaluation," he said, and walked toward the exit like he had somewhere better to be. But at the door, he stopped without turning around. "Mercer." Ava looked at him. "You're scheduled for the combined ruck march tomorrow at 0600. I'm taking over instruction for the morning session." He paused. "Hope you can keep up." He left. The evaluator exhaled. Delgado caught Ava's eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. A warning. She nodded back. She'd understood already. Bang. The ruck march the next morning was 15 miles with a 50-pound pack. Knox set a pace that was aggressive even for his own unit. 3 soldiers from the Ranger Battalion fell out by mile 7. That wasn't unusual for Knox's sessions. He considered it a feature. Ava stayed at the front of the formation. Not conspicuously, not performatively. She simply ran her pace, which happened to be the pace required to stay at the front. By mile 10, Knox had positioned himself directly beside her. He didn't say anything for a full quarter mile, just matched her stride, breath-controlled, watching her from the corner of his eye the way you watch something you're trying to figure out. Then he said, "How long you been with DevGru?" 4 years. "Combat deployments?" 6. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 6. "They sending women into combat now?" "Yes," Ava said. "They have been for a while." Knox was quiet again. "What's your qualification in?" "Combat diving, sniper, advanced SERE." He went quiet for longer this time. Ava could feel it costing him something, the silence. Like he was working through a problem he hadn't expected. At mile 11, he said, "You know what your problem is, Mercer. I imagine you're going to tell me. Your problem is you think credentials are the same as respect. They're not. You can have every piece of paper the Navy wants to hand you, but in the field, nobody cares what's on your file. They care who you are when it gets bad." Ava took 4 steady strides before answering. "I agree with that," she said. Knox blinked. "And I think," she continued, same even voice, "that the people who've served with me in the field already know the answer to that question, so I don't have anything to prove to anyone who hasn't." The pause that followed lasted so long that the soldier running 2 positions back later said he thought he'd imagined what he'd heard. Knox said nothing. He moved back to the middle of the formation and didn't speak directly to her again for the rest of the march. But when they reached the finish line and Ava crossed it in the top 4 of the group, she caught Knox staring at her from across the yard. Not with anger. With something colder than anger. Calculation. That evening, Corporal Jessica Vance knocked on the door of Ava's room in Building C. Vance was 26, a signals intelligence specialist, and she had the look of someone who had learned to make herself small in every room she entered. It wasn't natural to her. You could tell by the way she squared her shoulders first, like she was deliberately compressing something before she walked through a doorway. Ava let her in. Vance stood just inside the door and didn't sit down. I just wanted to say... Vance started, then stopped. Started again. I've been here 14 months. Okay. In those 14 months, I've watched Knox do this to 4 women. 4 that I know about personally. She stopped again. The last one, Lieutenant Park. She'd been in the Army 8 years. 8 years. She requested a transfer 2 weeks after Knox started. She didn't give a reason in writing, but everyone knew. Ava was listening. I'm not telling you to be scared, Vance said quickly. I wanted someone to know that I've been keeping track. Because when it happens, when he really turns it up, I've watched women try to report it and get told they misunderstood the situation, that they were too sensitive, that Knox's methods are unorthodox but effective. She swallowed. I just wanted someone to know I've been keeping track. Ava looked at her for a long moment. Do you have documentation? Vance hesitated. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Names, dates, incidents I witnessed directly. I have more at home printed. Ava took the paper. Vance. Ma'am, you've been carrying this for 14 months without knowing if anyone would ever take it seriously. Vance didn't answer. She didn't need to. Thank you, Ava said quietly. I mean that. Something in Vance's face shifted. Not dramatically. Just the way ice shifts in late winter, when warmth finally touches it from a direction it didn't expect. She nodded once and left. Ava unfolded the paper. Read it slowly, carefully, the way she would read a field intelligence report. 6 names. 14 incidents. Dates going back 3 years. And next to 3 of the incidents, a note in small, careful handwriting, commanding officer present, no action taken. She folded it back up, set it on the desk, and sat there in the dark for a long time, very still, the way she got still when something important was becoming clear. Day 4. The joint training schedule had Ava's group sharing the weight and conditioning facility with Knox's unit from 0700 to 0900. Knox arrived at 0715 with 6 of his men, which meant the room had an audience. It always meant an audience. He started talking before he was fully through the door. Let's see if our DevGru specialist can teach us something today, boys. Real honor having a Navy woman show Army Rangers how to lift weights. Low laughter from his men. Performative, slightly forced. The kind of laughter that exists not because something is funny, but because the person laughing has learned there are consequences for staying silent. Ava didn't look up from the bar she was loading. Knox moved closer. What's the weight, Mercer? 215. 215. He said it like she'd claimed to have walked on water. That's a big number for someone your size. Ava positioned herself at the bar. Knox. She said his name without rank, without ceremony, and the room changed temperature. Even his own men felt it. He raised an eyebrow. I'm going to lift this weight now, she said. If you want to have a conversation after I'm available. But I don't do well with noise during a lift. Complete silence. Knox's jaw worked. She could see it from her position at the bar. That familiar micro-expression, the slight tightening around the eyes that meant he was recalibrating. Then he did something nobody in the room expected. He laughed. It sounded genuine. Okay, he said. Let's see it. He stepped back. Ava gripped the bar, breathed, pulled from the floor in a clean, controlled deadlift, locked out at the top, set it down without dropping it. The room was quiet for a beat. Then one of Knox's Rangers, a young staff sergeant named Briggs, said, "Clean lift." It was barely above a whisper, but Knox heard it. He turned and looked at Briggs with an expression that made Briggs suddenly find something interesting to study on the far wall. Knox turned back to Ava. And now the thing in his eyes wasn't calculation. It was something uglier. It was the look of a man who is losing and knows it and is trying to decide how far he's willing to go to stop that from happening. That night, Okafor found Ava in the mess hall eating alone. He sat down across from her without asking. "He's escalating," Okafor said. No preamble. Ava cut into her food. "I know." He talked to the evaluation board today about adjusting the integration program assessment criteria. Okafor kept his voice low. "Nothing official, just a conversation. But I heard about it." Ava looked up. "He's trying to change the standard to something he can control," Okafor said. "And because he's Knox, there's a real chance someone listens." "What specifically?" "He's pushing for a full-contact combat simulation as the final assessment. No restrictions, no weight classes. Just a straight match." Ava set down her fork. "When would this run?" "The combat exhibition tournament is in 3 days. He wants to fold the integration program final assessment into that event." Okafor paused. 500 soldiers, base command, Pentagon observers. It's the biggest audience of the year. The mess hall hummed around them. Somewhere across the room, someone laughed at something. Ava picked her fork back up. "He wants a stage," she said. "He wants to break you in front of everyone, so that no one on this base will ever wonder about him again." Okafor's voice dropped lower. "Mercer, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Are you safe to compete? I mean, I've watched you train. I know you're capable, but this isn't just a match. Knox fights to injure. He's done it before, and the medical reports always say training accident." Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I appreciate you asking. That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She finished her meal, and Okafor sat there after she left, staring at the empty tray, trying to figure out whether what he'd just seen in her eyes was confidence or something else entirely. Something that had been forged in places he'd never been through, things he'd never experienced. Something that didn't have a clean name in peacetime. Kag. That night, late past midnight, someone slid a note under the door of Ava's room. She was already awake. She didn't sleep much in new environments. Old habit. She picked it up. 4 words in handwriting she didn't recognize. "We're watching. We see." She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She stood at the door for a moment, opened it quietly, and looked down the hallway. Empty. She went back inside. Set the note on the desk next to Vance's folded paper. 2 pieces of paper. 2 different kinds of courage expressed by people who hadn't yet found a way to put their names on either one. Ava sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark. She thought about the 6 names on Vance's list. She thought about Lieutenant Park, 8 years in the Army, gone in 2 weeks. She thought about Knox's face during the deadlift, the exact moment he decided that control wasn't enough anymore. She thought about the anonymous note and what it meant that someone felt the need to express support through a piece of paper slipped under a door at midnight rather than a conversation in daylight. She'd seen this before. Not here, not exactly like this. But the shape of it was familiar. The way fear organizes itself around a single person. The way institutions develop a kind of collective amnesia about the things they allow to happen. The way good people hold their breath and hope someone else will be the one to do something. She didn't blame them. She understood exactly how fear worked. She had been in enough places where fear was the only rational response to a real situation. And she knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was the decision that something else mattered more. She lay down, stared at the ceiling. Thought about the combat exhibition tournament in 3 days. 500 people. Pentagon observers. Knox grinning as he walked into the ring. She thought about what Okafor had said. He wants to break you in front of everyone, so that no one on this base will ever wonder about him again. She closed her eyes. 3 days. Check. Day 5 started before dawn. Ava was on her way to the track when she passed the building where the female officers were housed and saw a light on in a ground floor window. She recognized the silhouette behind the glass. Corporal Vance. Vance was sitting at a desk, not working, just sitting staring at something on the desk in front of her that Ava couldn't make out. She didn't knock. She didn't stop. But she made a decision in that moment, walking past that window in the dark, that she hadn't fully articulated until right then. She wasn't going into that tournament for herself. She had been in enough fights for her own survival. She had spent enough of her career proving things to people who needed convincing. That wasn't what this was. This was for the 6 names on that piece of paper. This was for Lieutenant Park. This was for Corporal Vance, sitting in the dark at 5 in the morning, staring at evidence she'd been collecting for 14 months, wondering if it would ever matter. This was for every soldier on this base who'd watched Knox do what he did and felt the helplessness of knowing the institution would protect him over them. Ava kept walking. She hit the track, and she ran. At 800, 2 hours before the morning training block, Knox called an informal meeting of his unit in the bay. Ava knew about it because Briggs, the young ranger who had said clean lift, mentioned it afterward. Not because he was feeding information, because something in Ava's manner made people around her want to be honest. "He told us the tournament is the most important thing this week," Briggs said. He didn't quite meet her eyes. He said the purpose is to establish clarity. Clarity about what? Briggs hesitated. About standards. About who belongs in special operations programs. He finally looked at her. "He was talking about you, Lieutenant. He didn't say your name, but everyone understood." Ava said, "Thank you for telling me, Briggs." He nodded and started to walk away. "Briggs." He stopped. "What do you think?" The question caught him off guard. He turned back around. He was 23, 24 at most, with the particular combination of pride and uncertainty that young combat soldiers carry. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply and very quietly, "I think what I've seen this week doesn't match what he's been saying for years." He left. Ava stood alone in the corridor. One day until the tournament. One day until Knox turned 500 soldiers into an audience for what he'd already decided would be a demonstration of her limitations. She went to find Okafor. He was in his logistics office, and he looked up when she walked in with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for something but wasn't sure what. She sat down across from him. "I need you to do something for me. Tell me, make sure there are multiple recording devices capturing the full tournament. Not just the official base footage. Personal devices, observers with cameras. I need the whole thing documented from multiple angles." Okafor studied her. "You think he's going to do something that needs to be on record. I think he's going to do what he always does," Ava said. "And I want there to be no version of events after the fact that's easier to believe than what actually happened." Okafor was quiet. Then he said very carefully, "What do you know that you haven't told me?" Ava looked at him. "I know what kind of man he is," she said. "I've been watching him for 5 days. And I've read the history Vance has been keeping. A man who does what Knox does doesn't get controlled by losing. He gets more dangerous, because the whole system he's built is based on the story that he doesn't lose. And if that story breaks," Ava's voice was level, "then we find out who he really is." Okafor held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. "I know 4 people with personal cameras," he said. "Give me an hour. Check." That night was the last quiet night before everything changed. At 22:30, a second note appeared under Ava's door. She read it standing up. This one was signed. 6 names. The same 6 names from Vance's list. Below them, in the same careful handwriting as the first note, 2 sentences. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we want you to know we're not looking away this time. We never should have before." Ava read it twice, folded it, set it in her pocket. She didn't sleep much that night, but what sleep she found was the clean, untroubled kind. The kind that comes not from peace, but from resolution, from having made a decision that goes all the way down. She knew what was coming. She'd been trained to walk toward exactly that. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Vanguard, Ava Mercer felt something settle into place inside her. Not confidence, not anger, something quieter than both. Clarity. The morning of the combat exhibition tournament, Ava was already dressed and sitting on the edge of her bunk when the base alarm sounded at 05:30. She hadn't needed it. She'd been awake since 4. Not from nerves. From the kind of focused stillness that settles into a person when they've stopped deciding and started doing. She picked up the folded note from the night before, the one signed by 6 names, and put it in the breast pocket of her uniform. Buttoned it shut, pressed her palm flat against it once like a soldier checking a magazine. Then she stood up and walked out. The hallway in Building C was already moving. Word had spread through the entire base about the tournament. Not just the event itself, but what it meant. Fort Vanguard had hosted the combat exhibition for 9 consecutive years, and it had always been competitive. But this year, the air around it felt different. Tighter. Like a wire pulled past its tested tension point. Corporal Vance was in the hallway pulling her jacket on. She looked up when Ava came out of her room, and for a second neither of them spoke. Then Vance said, "How are you feeling?" Ava considered the question like it deserved a real answer. Focused. Vance nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else, something larger, but couldn't find the shape of it. What came out was quieter than what she'd intended. Whatever happens today, it already matters. What you did this week, just by being here and not flinching, it already matters. Ava looked at her for a moment. "Get a good spot near the front," she said, "and keep your eyes open." Vance straightened. "Yes, ma'am." Ava walked down the hall and out into the morning. The base was already filling. Personnel from 3 different units were moving toward the main training yard where the tournament brackets had been posted the night before. A temporary observation platform had been erected for the Pentagon representatives, 4 of them, who had arrived the previous afternoon. Brass from the regional command was present. Cameras were set up at the official recording stations, and Okafor had done what he'd promised. Ava spotted him near the west end of the yard when she arrived. He gave her a small nod. She scanned the perimeter without being obvious about it, and counted at least 6 personal devices being operated by soldiers, who didn't look like they were officially assigned to documentation. One of them was Briggs, holding a phone at his side with the screen angled outward. She looked back at Okafor and nodded once. The bracket was straightforward. 16 competitors, 4 preliminary rounds, 2 semifinals, 1 final. No weight classes, which Knox had specifically pushed for in his adjustment to the assessment structure. The matches were full contact within a defined rule set, no strikes to the back of the head, no fish hooking, no deliberate joint attacks, standard combat sport restrictions. Ava read the bracket. Her name was seated in the lower half. Knox was seated in the upper. If both of them won their preliminary and semifinal matches, they would meet in the final. Knox had designed the bracket himself. She should have been surprised. She wasn't. She found her warm-up space in a corner of the yard and began working through her mobility routine. Around her, the noise of 500 soldiers assembling was building into something loud and institutional, the kind of crowd sound that has its own momentum. She heard Knox before she saw him. His voice carried across the yard with the particular confidence of someone who has never once in his career walked into a room and felt anything other than ownership of it. "There she is, our Navy representative." He said it like he was announcing a joke. "You sleep well, Mercer?" She didn't look up from her stretching. "Fine. You..." He crouched down to her level, which was an aggressive thing disguised as casual. "You know you don't have to do this. Integration assessment can be completed differently. I could talk to the board, arrange something more appropriate to your, He gestured vaguely. "Situation." Ava finally looked at him. "My situation," she repeated. "Your size, your build. It's not an insult, it's just reality." He smiled. "Nobody would think less of you." "I appreciate the offer," she said. Her voice was completely even. "I'll compete." Knox straightened up. The smile stayed, but something behind it cooled. "Your call." He walked away, and Sergeant First Class Pete Okafor, who had positioned himself close enough to hear every word of that exchange, turned and quietly walked to where Briggs was standing. He said very low, "You got that?" Briggs checked his screen. Every word. Okafor said nothing else. He just moved back to his station. The tournament began at 0800. The first 3 preliminary matches ran without incident. They were good matches technically. 2 Rangers and a Special Forces warrant officer demonstrating the kind of controlled aggression that comes from years of real-world application. The crowd responded with genuine enthusiasm. This was on its surface exactly what it was supposed to be, a showcase of military capability. Knox's preliminary match was 4th. His opponent was a highly capable Marine Staff Sergeant named Tillman, who had competed in the tournament twice before and placed 2nd both times. Tillman was 31, experienced, and genuinely hard to put down. Knox put him down in under 2 minutes. It wasn't brutal. It was worse than brutal. It was methodical. Knox disassembled Tillman's defense like he was teaching a class on it, controlled and unhurried, until he had Tillman in a position with no exits, and Tillman tapped. The crowd roared. Knox stood up and made no gesture of acknowledgement toward Tillman. He simply walked to the edge of the ring, found Ava's position in the crowd with his eyes, and held it for 3 seconds. Then he stepped out. Ava's preliminary match was 5th. Her opponent was a Ranger captain named Westfield, who was 6 feet 1, 210 pounds, and had the reputation of being the most technically complete fighter in his battalion. The match lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Ava didn't win dramatically. She won precisely. Every time Westfield established a position, she neutralized it. Every time he committed to an attack, she redirected the energy without absorbing it. It looked to a casual observer almost boring. Like watching someone methodically solve a math problem on a whiteboard while someone else tried to knock the marker out of their hand. But soldiers are not casual observers. And the soldiers watching Ava work understood exactly what they were seeing. Westfield tapped at 4 minutes 17 seconds from a shoulder lock that Ava had set up 3 exchanges earlier, a trap he'd walked into without realizing it was a trap. He stood up and looked at her with the expression of a man who needs to completely recalibrate his understanding of something. "Where did you train?" he asked. "Everywhere," she said, and helped him with his gear. The crowd response to Ava's match was different from the response to Knox's. Knox's crowd had been loud, almost tribal. Ava's crowd went quiet in a particular way, the quiet of people watching something that requires full attention, and then broke into applause that started uncertain and built into something sustained. Knox heard it. Everyone saw him hear it. He was near the observation platform speaking to one of the Pentagon representatives, and he paused mid-sentence, just for a fraction. Then he kept talking. But his eyes moved to the ring where Ava was accepting Westfield's handshake. And Staff Sergeant Briggs, watching Knox's face, instead of the ring, felt something cold settle into his chest. Because he had served under Knox for 2 years, and he knew that expression. He had seen it once before in a forward operating base in Afghanistan directed at a local interpreter who Knox had decided was unreliable. That interpreter had ended up with a broken collarbone 3 days later, ruled a training accident. Briggs very quietly made sure his phone was still recording. The morning moved through 2 more preliminary matches. By midday, the bracket had produced its 4 semifinalists: Knox Ava, a Marine Lieutenant Colonel named Hartley, and a Special Forces Major named Desjardins. The semifinal pairings put Hartley against Knox and Desjardins against Ava. Desjardins was 42, which in competition terms was old, but he had the specific gift of fighters who think faster than they move, and he was dangerous in ways that didn't look dangerous until you were already caught in something. The match against Ava ran 6 minutes. It was the best match of the tournament up to that point. Desjardins came at her with a level of sophistication that the earlier opponents hadn't shown, and for the first 3 minutes, it was genuinely competitive. The crowd leaned forward. Someone near Okafor said low, "She might lose this one." Okafor didn't respond. At 3 minutes 40 seconds, something shifted. Desjardins had been probing her left side consistently, and Ava had been giving him just enough there to keep him interested. Then she changed the geometry by 2 degrees, and Desjardins committed to a takedown he had been setting up for a minute and a half, and Ava wasn't where the takedown expected her to be. What followed lasted 11 seconds and ended with Desjardins looking at the sky. He started laughing while he was still on the ground. The full, genuine laugh of someone who has just been outplayed so cleanly they can't do anything but appreciate it. "That's good," he said. "That's really good." The crowd responded with a sound that had never quite happened at the tournament before. It wasn't just applause, it was a kind of collective recognition. The sound of 500 people simultaneously updating their understanding of something. Vance, standing near the front, exactly where Ava had told her to be, felt tears forming that she refused to let fall. Because what she was watching wasn't just a woman winning a match. It was the systematic demolition of a lie that had been told about women like her for years. On this base, in this yard, in front of the same faces that had said nothing for as long as she could remember, Knox's semi-final against Hartley ended in 3 minutes 20 seconds. Knox won efficiently, and with the specific kind of energy that tells you a person is not fighting at their ceiling. He was managing, conserving, waiting. And now there was no avoiding what the bracket had always been designed to produce. The final. Knox versus Mercer. The yard had gone through several different kinds of noise during the morning, but the sound that settled over it in the break between the semifinals and the final was new. It wasn't festive, and it wasn't hostile. It was the sound of a crowd that has become uncertain about who it is and what it wants to happen. Knox's men were loud, performatively loud the way people are when they're trying to fill a silence they don't control. But the rest of the yard was something else. Okafor moved through the crowd during the break and heard things he hadn't expected to hear. A Special Forces sergeant telling the man beside him, "She's technically cleaner than anyone I've seen at this level in 3 years." 2 female intelligence officers standing together without speaking, holding paper cups of coffee, watching the empty ring. A young private who couldn't have been more than 19 saying to his buddy, "If she beats him, what does that mean for all the stuff he's said?" His buddy didn't answer. Nobody had an answer for that yet. Knox found Ava during the break. She was alone at the edge of the yard, drinking water, not looking at anything in particular. The practiced stillness of someone who knows how to be completely present without broadcasting it. He walked up beside her and stood there for a moment before he spoke, and what he said quietly enough that it was just for her. "I want you to understand something before we go in." Ava waited. "This is the moment you decide how this goes. You can make this easy on yourself. Take a fall in the first 2 minutes, make it look real. You'd still be the best female competitor this base has ever seen. You walk away with your dignity and your record intact." Ava looked at him. He continued, "Or you make me actually do this. And if you make me do this, I'm not going to hold back to protect your feelings. And the story that comes out of it won't be the one you're hoping for." She held his gaze for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was so calm it was almost gentle. "Ethan." It was the first time she had used his first name. It landed in him somewhere unexpected. He didn't let it show, but she saw it. "I'm not asking you to hold back," she said. "And I'm not going to." She walked past him toward the ring. Knox stood there for 3 seconds. Then he turned and followed. The crowd that had been a mix of noise and uncertainty went silent as both competitors entered the ring. Not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for something to start. The held-breath silence of 500 people who understand without being told that whatever happens in the next few minutes is going to mean something beyond the moment. The base commander, Colonel Reeves, stepped to the edge of the ring. He was a careful man who had spent his career learning the difference between situations he could manage and situations that would manage him. He looked between Knox and Ava with the expression of someone who has just realized he is standing inside the second type. He said the required words. He stepped back. The match official raised his hand, dropped it. Knox came out fast. Faster than he had in any of his earlier matches. He had decided something during the break, and what he'd decided was that speed and aggression would end this before it became a narrative. He wanted the crowd to see her overwhelmed. He wanted the story to be simple, too small, too slow, done before it started. He hit air. Ava wasn't there. She had moved at the first shift in his weight distribution, reading the attack before it launched. What Knox threw and what connected were two completely different things, and the crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. He reset. Came again, this time varying the angle. She slipped it. Not dramatically. Just enough a minimal movement with precise timing that made his attack look enormous, and her defense look almost effortless. The crowd noise was building but differently than before. Not the roar for Knox. Something more complicated. Something with surprise threaded through it. Knox changed tactics. He shifted to a grappling game, which was where his size advantage should have mattered most. He clinched and tried to take her down. She went with the motion, used his grip as a fulcrum, and came out of the exchange in a position she had wanted to be in. He felt it immediately, and released, resetting again. They had been fighting for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Knox had not landed a clean strike. One of the Pentagon observers leaned toward the man beside him and said quietly, "Who is this woman?" The man beside him was a senior naval intelligence officer who had done his research before the trip. "Lieutenant Ava Mercer," he said, DEVGRU, 6 combat deployments. Currently holds the record for the longest confirmed solo surveillance operation in naval special warfare history. The Pentagon observer watched the ring. "Why haven't I heard of her?" The naval officer said, "Because she's very good at not being heard of." In the ring, Knox was doing something that his men had never seen him do in competition. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, from something closer to frustration that was beginning to tip toward panic. Because every system, he had every tool in the arsenal that had made him the undisputed king of this base for 11 years, was finding nothing to grab onto. She didn't have ego he could exploit. She didn't have anger he could provoke. She didn't have fear he could amplify. She moved and thought and competed like someone who had genuinely nothing to prove and genuinely nothing to lose. And that combination was the one thing Knox had never figured out how to beat. At the 3-minute mark, Ava landed her first clean counter. It wasn't devastating. It was informational. A short right hand that came over his guard exactly where it had been open for the last 40 seconds, landing clean on his cheekbone and snapping his head back by 2 inches. Knox blinked. And in the crowd, something happened, slowly starting somewhere in the middle of the yard and spreading outward. Soldiers who had been silent began to make noise. Not Knox's name, not a chant, just a general sound. The sound of a crowd that has crossed a threshold and can no longer pretend to be neutral. Knox heard it. He looked out at the yard for one fraction of a second. That was the moment Ava had been waiting for. She moved into the gap his distraction created and took a dominant position with both hands. And for the next 30 seconds, she controlled the match entirely. He was reacting, not acting. Following, not leading. And 500 people were watching the most feared man on the base follow a 120-pound Navy SEAL around a combat ring like he'd forgotten how to do anything else. He threw her off, got his feet under him, breathed. The crowd noise was fully present now, layered and complex. Knox's men still loud, but voices between them and around them saying other things. Saying her name. Saying things that had been held for months and years, inside people who had been waiting for a day that felt safe enough. There were 20 seconds left in the round. Knox looked at Ava across 3 feet of space, and for the first time all day, all week, he looked at her without calculation, without the performance of confidence, without the armor of rank and reputation. He just looked at her. And what was in his eyes in that moment was something that every soldier who caught a clear view of his face from the right angle would remember for years afterward. It was the recognition of a man who finally understands that the story he has been telling about himself is not the same as the truth. And instead of letting that recognition change him, Knox made the worst decision of his career. He looked down at her lead knee. The match official's eyes widened. Okafor, watching from the perimeter, said out loud without meaning to, "Don't." Knox pulled his right leg back, and in the fraction of a second between the beginning of that motion and its completion, Ava read it with the same clarity she'd used to read every situation that had ever tried to kill her. She'd been trained by people who taught her that the most dangerous moment in any fight is not when your opponent is strongest. It's when they stop caring about the rules. She moved. One pivot precise and complete, that redirected the incoming force through a leverage point Knox hadn't protected because he hadn't been thinking about protection. He'd been thinking about destruction. The sound that followed was not something anyone who heard it ever fully described to people who hadn't been there. Not because they couldn't find the words, because the words felt too small for what the moment meant. Knox hit the dirt, and the yard all 500 people went completely silent. For 3 full seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then medics were running, and Ava Mercer was standing in the center of the ring, hands at her sides, breathing steady. Not celebrating, not angry, just standing there with the expression of someone who has just watched something inevitable happen and finds no satisfaction in having been right. Colonel Reeves walked to the edge of the ring and looked at her. She looked back at him. Around them both the silence was cracking open, people beginning to move, to speak, to process. But in the ring, it was still. Reeves said quietly, so that only she could hear, "Are you all right?" Ava didn't answer right away. She watched the medics work. She watched Knox's face white with pain and shock, and something that might have been the beginning of a reckoning. Then she said, "I've been all right this whole week, Colonel. Nobody asked until now." Reeves held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away first. And at the perimeter of the yard, Corporal Jessica Vance finally let the tears fall silently and without apology into the cold morning air of the base that had told her for 14 months that she was wrong about what she had seen. She wasn't wrong. She had never been wrong. The medics were still working on Knox when Colonel Reeves walked back to the observation platform and asked everyone with a recording device to hand it over for official documentation purposes. Nobody moved. Reeves asked again. His voice had the particular tightness of a man who understands he is already losing a situation and is trying to stop the bleeding through authority he no longer fully owns. Still, nobody moved. Okafor, standing at the perimeter, watched 6 soldiers exchange glances, pocket their devices, and very quietly walk in different directions. Briggs was one of them. He didn't run. He didn't make a scene. He just turned and walked toward the barracks at a pace that suggested he had somewhere else to be, his phone pressed flat against the inside of his jacket screen, down, still recording the audio of what was happening around him. Reeves knew. He could see it happening in real time. He looked at the space where the crowd had been now thinning, as soldiers dispersed with the specific urgency of people trying to be somewhere else before someone asks them a direct question. His aide stepped close. "Sir, we need to get ahead of this." Reeves didn't answer. He was looking at Ava, who had not moved from the edge of the ring. She was watching the medics load Knox onto a stretcher with the focused attention of someone committing every detail to memory. "Lieutenant Mercer," Reeves called. She turned. "My office. Now." She walked across the yard toward him. Around them, the tournament equipment was being disassembled by soldiers who worked with the mechanical efficiency of people trying very hard not to look at each other. The 4 Pentagon observers were a cluster near the platform, speaking in low voices. One of them, the naval intelligence officer who had identified Ava earlier, was not in the cluster. He was standing slightly apart, watching Ava cross the yard, and his expression was not the expression of a bureaucrat managing a crisis. It was the expression of someone taking very careful note of what kind of person walks toward accountability instead of away from it. His name was Rear Admiral Stephen Voss. He had not introduced himself to anyone at Fort Vanguard except Reeves. He had come to observe the integration program and write a routine assessment report. He was no longer thinking about the routine assessment report. He was thinking about Ava Mercer. Reeves's office felt smaller than it was. That happened sometimes with spaces where consequential things were said. The walls seemed to press inward. Reeves sat behind his desk. Ava stood. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He looked at her for a moment. Walk me through what happened. Knox launched a knee destruction kick in the last 15 seconds of the final match, Ava said. It was the same flat factual voice she used for after-action reports. Illegal under the stated rules of the tournament. I redirected the force using a counter I've performed in training approximately 200 times. The resulting injury is consistent with the biomechanics of the exchange. Reeves was quiet. That's the technical version, he said. Give me the human version. Something shifted in Ava's expression. Not much, just enough to let him see that there was a human version. He decided he would rather hurt me permanently than lose cleanly, she said. In front of 500 people, Pentagon observers, and a full camera array. He decided that. Reeves exhaled through his nose. The injury is significant. His leg will require surgery. I know. The base medical team is calling it a training accident pending review. The silence that followed that statement was the loudest thing in the room. Ava looked at him steadily. With respect, Colonel, there are at least 6 personal recordings of the exchange from multiple angles. Reeves's jaw tightened. I'm aware. And there is documented evidence of a pattern of behavior by Sergeant Knox going back 3 years. I have a preliminary copy in my possession. I'm prepared to submit it through the appropriate channels. Reeves went very still. Where did you get that? From soldiers on this base who have been holding it, Ava said, because they had no reason to believe it would be taken seriously. The silence this time was different. It had weight in it, the specific weight of a man realizing that the situation he thought he could manage has roots that go deeper than the event that surfaced it. Reeves stood up, turned toward the window, spoke without looking at her. Whatever Knox did in that ring, the response to it cannot be allowed to look like a targeted attack on a decorated combat veteran. I understand how it looks, Ava said. I'm asking you to be more concerned about what it was. He turned back to her. For the first time, his expression had something in it that might have been honesty. Mercer, you've been here 6 days. Yes, sir. In 6 days, you have disrupted every established dynamic on this base, won a tournament that Knox has controlled the narrative of for 3 years, documented a pattern of abuse that several senior officers are going to find very uncomfortable, and you have done all of it without breaking a single regulation. A pause. Do you understand the position that puts me in? Ava looked at him. I understand the position it puts Knox's victims in if you don't act. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down, picked up his phone. Get me JAG, he said to whoever answered, and get Admiral Voss on the line. He looked at Ava. This is going to take time, and it is going to get complicated, and I need you to stay on base and stay available. I'm not going anywhere, she said. She stood to leave. Mercer. She stopped. Reeves looked at the desk, not at her. For what it's worth, what you did out there today, the way you competed. He stopped, started again. Knox has been running this base's culture for 11 years. 11 years. And I let it happen because the numbers were good and the fights were never in writing. He finally looked up. That's on me, not just on him. Ava held that for a moment. Then fix it, sir. She left. In the hallway outside Reeves's office, Okafor was waiting. He had no reason to be there. He'd come anyway. He fell into step beside her without being asked. What happened in there? He called JAG and Voss. Okafor let out a long breath. That's faster than I expected. He's not a bad man, Ava said. He made bad decisions out of convenience. Those are different problems with different solutions. Okafor looked at her sideways. You're more generous than I'd be in your position. I'm not being generous, she said. I'm being accurate, because if we treat every person who enabled this as equivalent to Knox himself, we lose the people who might actually help us now. Okafor was quiet for several steps. Then, "You've done this before. Not the fighting. The after part." Ava didn't answer directly. Every mission has a target and a mission. Knox was a target. What he built here, the culture, the silence, the system that protected him, that's the mission. They came out into the open, and the afternoon light hit hard. Across the yard, Ava could see a cluster of female soldiers near the building entrance. She recognized Vance among them. There were 5 others women she hadn't spoken to yet, standing close together in the way people stand when they've just made a collective decision that scares them. Ava walked toward them. They saw her coming, and nobody moved. Nobody ran. But the tension in the group was the specific tension of people who have rehearsed something and aren't sure they'll be able to say it when the moment actually comes. Vance was the one who spoke first. "Lieutenant, we want to make formal statements. All of us." Ava stopped in front of them. She looked at each face briefly, and specifically the way she'd look at her team before an operation. Seeing them. Actually seeing them. "Okay," she said. One of the other women, a first lieutenant named Carla Ruiz, who had been at Fort Vanguard for 2 years, said, "We've been told before that complaints about Knox would be handled internally, and internally meant it disappeared." Her voice held steady. "We need to know this is different." "I can't promise you a specific outcome," Ava said. "I can tell you that there is now video evidence, multiple sources, and senior command involvement. I can tell you that what you say will be officially recorded. What I can promise you is that I will not let it be buried, not without a fight." Ruiz looked at the others. Something passed between them in the way things pass between people who have been watching each other's backs in a place that didn't watch their backs for them. "Then we're ready," Ruiz said. Ava pulled out her phone and called Okafor. "I need JAG access in the next hour. I have 6 soldiers who need to give formal statements." A pause on the line. Then Okafor said, "I'll make it happen." She hung up, looked at the group. "Follow me." They did. That was the moment that small procession across the Fort Vanguard yard that soldiers who saw it later identified as the thing they remembered most clearly from that day. Not the match, not Knox going down, not the crack that had silenced 500 people. This. 6 women walking in formation behind a 7th across a yard, where they'd been told for years that what they saw and what they felt and what happened to them wasn't worth the paperwork. Briggs saw it from his barracks doorway. He watched until they disappeared into the administrative building. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a text to 2 other Rangers in his unit. It said only, "We need to talk tonight." He got 2 responses within 30 seconds. Both of them said, "I know." The JAG session ran 3 hours. 3 hours of 6 women giving accounts that were detailed and specific and corroborated each other in the overlapping way that true accounts do, not perfectly matched, not identical, but anchored in the same facts from different vantage points. The JAG officer, a major named Patricia Chen, was methodical and thorough, the kind of professional who creates space for difficult things to be said without either minimizing or performing sympathy. Ava sat in the hallway outside the room the whole 3 hours. She didn't go in. It wasn't her story to tell for them. She just stayed in the hallway in case any of them came out needing something. None of them came out. They all stayed in and finished. When it was over, Ruiz was the last one out. She looked at Ava, who was still in the hallway, and she said, "You've been sitting here this whole time?" "Yes." Ruiz studied her. "Why?" Ava considered the question. "Because the hardest part of any of this isn't saying it in the room. It's deciding to go into the room. I wanted someone to be here in case that decision felt uncertain on the way out." Ruiz didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Where were you 5 years ago?" It was half a question and half something that didn't have a word. Ava heard both halves. "I should have been here sooner," she said. "I'm sorry it took this long." Ruiz nodded once, the short, tight nod of someone accepting something hard. Then she walked out. Ava leaned her head back against the wall. Major Chen appeared in the doorway. "Lieutenant." "Can I speak with you?" Ava went in. Chen closed the door. She set a folder on the table between them and put both hands flat on it like she was keeping it from floating away. "What I've collected today changes the scope of this significantly." "I know. The accounts reference incidents across 3 years, multiple witnesses to some of them, medical reports that are in the system under different classifications, and they reference at least 4 officers who were present during incidents Knox was later able to characterize as training situations." Ava was quiet. "I'm going to be honest with you, Lieutenant. When I walk this upstairs, there are careers involved beyond Knox, senior careers, people who are going to want this contained. I know that too." Chen looked at her directly. "Are you prepared for what happens when it isn't contained?" Ava met her gaze. "I've been in situations where the right thing to do and the safe thing to do were not the same thing. I always chose the right thing. I didn't do it here to start choosing differently now." Chen held her gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up the folder. "I'll have this on Reeves's desk and Voss's tablet within the hour." She moved toward the door. "Major Chen." Chen stopped. "The women who came in today. This took real courage from them. Whatever comes next, I need them to be treated like the brave soldiers they are, and not like administrative problems." Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her posture did. "Lieutenant, I have been doing this job for 14 years. I know the difference between someone who comes forward because they want something and someone who comes forward because they can't live with staying silent." She paused. "Every person in that room today was the second kind. I will not forget that." She left. The hallway was empty. Ava sat in the room alone for a minute. Just sat there. She was tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep, the way you get tired when you've been holding something heavy, not with your body, but with the part of you that decides who you are. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, text message, 4 words. "They're talking about you." She stared at it. Then a second text from the same number immediately after. "Not just here, online. Someone posted the video." Ava closed her eyes. She had anticipated this. Okafor had arranged the documentation specifically because she'd anticipated this. But anticipating something and having it actually happen are 2 different kinds of weight, and she felt the second kind settle into her shoulders now. She opened a browser on her phone. It took 11 seconds to find it. The footage was 37 seconds long. Someone had clipped the final exchange of the match starting 10 seconds before Knox's illegal kick through the counter, through the sound, through Knox hitting the ground. The clip was clean. Multiple angles had been edited together, which meant someone with video editing capability had been working on it in the hours since the match ended. It had been posted 2 hours ago. It had been shared 43,000 times. The comments were already thousands deep, and they were everything Ava had known they would be. Military veterans identifying Knox's kick as illegal. Women sharing their own stories. People debating whether Ava had acted proportionally. News aggregators reposting the footage with headlines that hadn't been run by anyone for accuracy. She put the phone face down on the table. She thought about what she'd told Okafor. That this wasn't for herself. That this was for the 6 names on Vance's piece of paper. She picked the phone back up, looked at the clip again. Whatever else was true about what was going to happen next. One thing was undeniable. The story that Knox had controlled for 11 years, the story of who he was and what the women around him deserved, that story was over. It had ended 37 seconds ago, and 43,000 shares later, and it was not coming back. She stood up, walked out into the hallway. Okafor was at the end of the corridor. She didn't have to tell him she'd seen it. He could see it in her face. "How bad?" she asked. "Depends on your definition," he said. "The clip is everywhere. Military forums, news sites, it's getting picked up by major networks. I've had 3 calls in the last hour. 2 were reporters trying to get base access. 1 was from Admiral Voss's office." "What did Voss's office want?" "The Admiral wants to meet with you directly. tonight. Ava processed this. What do you know about Voss? Enough, Okafor said. He's not a man who makes courtesy calls. She nodded slowly. Set it up. Okafor pulled out his phone. There's something else. She waited. Knox is out of surgery. He's stable, and apparently he's already talking. Talking to who? His lawyer, a civilian attorney who arrived on base 40 minutes ago. Okafor paused. A very expensive civilian attorney who got here very fast for someone who wasn't already nearby. Ava looked at him. Someone called that attorney before the surgery. Before the surgery, Okafor confirmed. Which means someone on this base with Knox's private contact information made that call while the medics were still on the field. The hallway felt very quiet. Who has that access? Ava asked. That's the question, isn't it? Okafor looked at the floor. There are 3 senior officers on this base whose names come up in Vance's documentation, not as witnesses, as people who were present and said nothing. He paused. One of them was on the observation platform today. Ava was still. With the Pentagon observers, she said. Yes. So while we were in JAG for 3 hours, someone with command-level access and a vested interest in the outcome was already mobilizing. Yes, she breathed in. Out. All right. Who else knows what we know right now? You, me, Chen. And I think Voss based on the speed of his request for a meeting. Then tonight matters more than today did. Yes, Okafor said. It does. He started dialing. She walked back toward the yard. The base at dusk had a different feeling than the base at dawn. It was quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful. The kind of quiet where a lot of things are moving beneath the surface of what you can hear. Vance was waiting outside Building C. She had a paper bag in her hands. She held it out when Ava reached her. You haven't eaten since this morning, Vance said. I know because I've been watching. Ava took the bag. You've been watching. It's what I do, Vance said simply. I pay attention to what's happening around me. It's the thing that kept me sane here when nothing else did. Ava opened the bag. A sandwich, an apple, 2 protein bars. She ate standing up because there wasn't time to do anything else. Vance stood beside her and didn't try to fill the silence with words. That itself was a kind of care, the specific kind that understands when presence is enough and conversation would be one thing too many. After a minute, Ava said, Someone on this base made a call to Knox's attorney before he was even out of the ring. Vance was quiet for a beat. I know who it was. Ava looked at her. Major General Clifford Haynes, Vance said. He was on the observation platform. He and Knox have known each other since they were stationed at Bragg 12 years ago. And his name is in the notes I didn't give you. The second set, the ones I kept at home. The apple was halfway to Ava's mouth. She lowered it. There's a second set of notes. There's a second set of notes, Vance confirmed. I didn't give you everything the first night. I didn't know you yet. I wasn't sure how far this would go. She met Ava's eyes. I'm sure now. What's in the second set? Vance looked at her steadily. Haynes was present during 2 incidents Knox was investigated for informally in 2021 and 2022. Both investigations were closed before they reached formal review. I have dates, times, and the name of the JAG officer who was assigned to the 2022 case and then transferred to a posting in Germany 6 weeks later. The yard was nearly empty now. The last light was going. Ava looked at Vance for a long moment. You've been sitting on this for how long? 14 months, Vance said, since the day I arrived here and figured out what this place was. And you kept it. I kept it, Vance said, because I was afraid, and because I was waiting for a reason to believe it would matter. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. Held it out. Ava took it, held it flat in her palm. This small thing that contained 14 months of one woman's courage expressed in the only way that had felt safe enough at the time. Vance. Ma'am. You're going to be okay, Ava said. Whatever happens next, I need you to hold on to that. Vance's throat moved. She nodded once, swallowed whatever she was feeling back into the place where she'd been keeping things for over a year. Get some sleep, Ava said. Tomorrow is going to start early. She closed her fingers around the USB drive and walked toward the administrative building where Voss was waiting. Behind her, Vance stood in the last of the evening light watching her go. The base was quiet, but the quiet was the kind that happens right before something large and irreversible begins to move. Rear Admiral Stephen Voss did not look like a man who had spent the last 4 hours managing a crisis. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a crisis like this one for a very long time and was finally ready to do something about it. He was sitting at the far end of the conference table in the base administrative building when Ava walked in, and he stood when she entered, which was not something senior naval officers typically did for lieutenants. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He sat. He looked at her hands. She was still holding the USB drive. "What's on that?" he asked. "Evidence," Ava said. 14 months of documented incidents, witness accounts, and what appears to be a record of a 2022 JAG investigation that was closed before it reached formal review, possibly with assistance from Major General Clifford Haynes. Voss was very still for a moment. "Where did you get it?" "A corporal who has been quietly collecting it since the day she arrived here because she understood what was happening and didn't believe anyone would take it seriously." Voss looked at the drive. Then he looked at Ava. "Give it to me." She held his gaze. "Tell me what you're going to do with it." The silence that followed was the kind that would have felt dangerous with most flag officers. Voss seemed to find it reasonable. "I'm going to open a formal investigation that bypasses the Fort Vanguard chain of command entirely," he said. "It will be run directly out of my office. It will be insulated from any officer whose name appears in that documentation, including Haynes, especially Haynes." He leaned forward slightly. "Lieutenant, I've been watching this base for 18 months from a distance. The integration program wasn't my only reason for being here today. It was my cover for being here today. Knox has been a flag on our internal review system for 2 years. We couldn't build a formal case without someone inside this institution willing to hold still long enough to let us build one around them." Ava looked at him. "You knew what Knox was." "We suspected. Suspicion without evidence is just a feeling." He nodded at the drive. "That's evidence. And the 6 statements taken by Major Chen today. Also evidence." He paused. "You didn't come here to prove yourself, did you? The integration program. You came here because someone sent you." It wasn't a question. Ava answered it anyway. "I came here because I was the right person for the situation," she said. "I won't tell you more than that." Voss studied her for a long moment. Then he almost smiled, the small, controlled expression of someone who respects an answer even when it's incomplete. She slid the USB drive across the table. He picked it up. "I need you to understand something about what happens now. The moment this investigation goes formal, you become a target. Not from Knox, from the people Knox knew. Haynes has connections across 4 commands. There will be pressure applied in ways that don't look like pressure. Your record will be examined. Your conduct today will be reframed. You will be called reckless, excessive, a political operator. I know. And you're prepared for that. I've been in worse positions with less support," Ava said. "At least here I'm on the right side of the paperwork." Voss picked up the drive and pocketed it. "Go get some sleep, Lieutenant. Tomorrow starts at 600 hours, and it doesn't stop for a long time." Ava stood, moved toward the door. "Mercer?" She stopped. "The women who gave statements today, they took a significant risk." "Yes," she said. "They did. Make sure they know they're not alone in this anymore." She looked back at him. "With respect, Admiral, make sure they can see that in what you do, not just in what I tell them." She left. Voss sat alone in the room for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds. When it was done, he sat back and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has just committed to something large and irreversible and has made peace with that. Down the hall, Ava walked back toward Building C. She had been awake for 19 hours. She didn't feel it yet. The adrenaline of the day was still metabolizing, still doing the work of keeping the exhaustion at bay. She knew it would hit her sometime in the next few hours, and when it did, it would hit hard. But for now, she was still clear-headed, still focused on the geometry of the situation. She thought about Knox in the hospital. Stable Okafor had said. Talking to his attorney. She thought about Haynes on the observation platform, making a call before Knox had even been lifted off the ground. She thought about the JAG officer from 2022 transferred to Germany 6 weeks after closing an investigation that should have stayed open. She thought about the 43,000 shares, and whatever that number was now hours later. She thought about Vance's face when she handed over the USB drive. 14 months compressed into a small piece of plastic and metal. 14 months of watching and documenting and believing against all available evidence that it would someday matter. Ava reached Building C and stopped outside the door. She pulled out her own phone and opened the browser. The video had hit 400,000 views. She put the phone away. Inside, she knocked on Vance's door. Vance answered immediately, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "Voss has the drive," Ava said. "The investigation is going formal, bypassing base command. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. I need you to be ready for that." Vance stood in her doorway with the expression of someone absorbing information they already prepared themselves for. How much harder? They'll go after credibility. Yours, Ruiz's, the others. They'll look for inconsistencies in the statements. They'll suggest motives. It's the standard playbook for this kind of defense. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been afraid of that for 14 months. I've thought about exactly that happening every time I almost came forward before." She paused. "But here's the thing I realized tonight while I was waiting. Tell me, the fear of what they do to me kept me quiet, and while I was quiet, it kept happening to other people." She met Ava's eyes. "I'd rather face whatever they throw at me than spend another year knowing I said nothing." Ava looked at her for a moment. "Get some rest. Both of us need it." She went to her own room. She sat on the edge of the bunk and did something she rarely allowed herself, which was to stop moving long enough to feel the weight of the day. Not process it, not analyze it, just feel it. The sound from the ring was still somewhere in her body. That specific sound. She'd heard it before in training situations that had gone wrong in field situations she never discussed in public forums. It was never a sound you got comfortable with. And she didn't think it should be a sound you got comfortable with, because the day it stopped affecting you was the day something important had gone wrong in how you understood what you were doing. She lay down. She was asleep in 4 minutes. The morning came without warning, the way mornings do when you fall asleep before you can dread them. Ava's phone rang at 05:30. Okafor. "It's moving fast," he said. "Faster than anything I've seen. The video, 2.3 million views as of an hour ago. It's been picked up by every major network. CNN ran a segment at midnight. Fox ran a counter-segment. 3 sitting senators have issued statements. One of them specifically named Fort Vanguard and called for a congressional inquiry." Ava sat up. "Which senator?" "Senator Patricia Diaz, Armed Services Committee. She's been pushing military sexual harassment reform for 2 years. Her office reached out to Base Command at 0400 asking for comment." "What did Base Command say?" "Nothing yet. Reeves has been on calls since 3 in the morning." A pause. "And Haynes left the base at 2200 last night. Booked a flight from the regional airport. His aide said it was a pre-scheduled personal matter." Ava was silent. "He ran," she said. "He left," Okafor said carefully. "Whether that's the same thing is for someone with more legal authority than me to determine." "Does Voss know?" "Voss knew before I did. I got a text from Chen at 5 saying that Haynes's access credentials have been flagged and his travel has been logged." He paused. "Voss moves fast." "Yes," Ava said. "He does." She was dressed in 3 minutes. The base at 05:45 felt like a different installation than the one she'd arrived at 6 days ago. The energy was different. The way people moved was different. She crossed the yard to the mess hall and felt the shift in how soldiers looked at her. Not all of them looked. Some looked away deliberately, and those she understood just as well as the ones who held her gaze. Change moves through institutions like weather. Some people open a window, and some people close the shutters, and both responses tell you something true. Briggs was at a table near the entrance. He stood when he saw her. "Can I sit with you?" he asked. She sat. He sat. He put both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the table. "I sent the footage to my personal attorney last night before I handed the original to the documentation team, just in case." Ava looked at him. "Smart. I've been in Knox's unit for 2 years," he said. "I've seen things I didn't report. I've laughed at things I shouldn't have laughed at." He looked up. "I'm not trying to make myself the victim of this. I just want you to know that I know what I did and didn't do, and I'm ready to say that in whatever format is required." This was not what Ava had expected from him at this particular moment. She said, "Why are you telling me?" Briggs thought about it. "Because you're the only person I've seen in the last 6 days who didn't seem to need anyone's approval to do the right thing, and I thought maybe some of that would help me figure out how to do it myself." Ava looked at him for a long moment. "Write it down," she said. "Everything you witnessed. Dates, if you have them, approximate time frames if you don't. Get it to Chen by noon." "Okay. And Briggs." He looked at her. "The fact that you're doing it now matters. It's not the same as doing it sooner, but it's not nothing either." He nodded, drank his coffee. Around them the mess hall was filling, and the conversations at other tables had the layered, overlapping quality of a place where everyone is talking about the same thing without necessarily talking to each other directly. Ava's phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. "Lieutenant Mercer." A woman's voice, professional, measured. "My name is Dana Park. I believe you know the name." Ava went very still. Lieutenant Park, 8 years in the Army, requested transfer 2 weeks after Knox started. Gone. "I know the name," Ava said carefully. "I've been watching the coverage since last night," Park said. "I left Fort Vanguard 14 months ago. I didn't file a formal complaint because I didn't believe it would go anywhere. I have documentation I kept from my time there. Specific to Knox. Specific to Haynes." A pause. "I saw the video. I saw what he tried to do to you. And I decided that I'm done being afraid of what speaking up means for me." Ava's hand tightened slightly around the phone. "Are you represented by counsel?" "Not yet." "Get a JAG referral before you submit anything. Protect yourself procedurally first." Ava paused. "And Lieutenant Park, what you have, whatever it is, it will matter. It already matters that you called." A silence on the line that held more than silence usually does. "I watched you in that ring," Park said finally. "On the video. The way you stood there after. You didn't look happy." "No," Ava said. "I wasn't." "Why not? You won." Ava thought about how to say what was true. Winning against Knox in a ring was the smallest part of this. The part that actually matters is what we do with the moment after. And that's not something to be happy about. It's something to be serious about. Park was quiet again. Then, "Thank you." "Thank you for calling," Ava said. "Don't wait on the attorney." She hung up. Across the table, Briggs had heard enough from her side of the conversation to understand the shape of it. He looked at her with an expression that had something new in it, something that hadn't been there 2 days ago, when he'd been one of the faces in Knox's crowd who laughed on cue. "It's bigger than this base, isn't it?" he said. "It was always bigger than this base," Ava said. "This base is just where it finally became visible." She stood, took her coffee, and walked toward the administrative building, where the day's formal proceedings were beginning. By 900, 3 things happened in quick succession that changed the temperature of everything. First, Senator Diaz's office released a formal statement calling for an emergency Armed Services Committee hearing on military harassment protocols, specifically citing the Fort Vanguard incident and naming Knox by rank and service number. The statement referenced footage that had been independently verified by 2 retired military attorneys as showing a clear violation of competition rules and possible criminal assault. Second, the Army's official public affairs office released a statement describing the tournament incident as under review and Knox's injury as the result of a training exchange. The statement did not name Ava. It did not acknowledge the illegal strike. It used the word accident 3 times in 4 sentences. The gap between those 2 statements landed in the media like a spark in dry grass. Third Major Chen walked into Reeves' office at 0917 with a folder and closed the door. She was in there for 40 minutes. When she came out, Reeves's aide immediately began clearing the colonel's schedule for the rest of the day. Okafor found Ava in the hallway at 0930 and pulled her into a side office. He closed the door and leaned against it. Haynes's name is in 2 of the 6 statements, he said. Not peripheral, central. One witness puts him in the room during a 2021 incident where Knox physically intimidated a female captain to the point where she required medical attention. The injury was logged as a sprained wrist from a fall during PT. Ava absorbed this. What was it actually? The statement says, Knox grabbed her wrist and twisted it when she refused to recant a verbal complaint she'd made to another officer the day before. Okafor's voice was even, but she could see what it was costing him to say it in that tone. Haynes was present. He told the woman that what she'd experienced was a misunderstanding and suggested she consider what a formal complaint would mean for her career progression. The room was very quiet. And she didn't file, Ava said. She requested a transfer 3 weeks later and left the military 12 months after that. He paused. Her name is Captain Rosa Ewing. She's now a defense contractor in Virginia. Chen's office reached her this morning. She's prepared to give a statement. That's 3 former soldiers now, Ava said. Park Ewing and the 6 currently on base. And Briggs submitted a written account at 0830, Okafor said. And 2 other rangers from his unit came to Chen's office independently this morning with corroborating observations, not primary witnesses, supporting. Ava looked at the ceiling for a moment. Not because there was anything to see there, because sometimes you need to look at something that isn't a person's face when you're trying to hold the full weight of what's being said. He had years, she said quietly, years of this, and the institution just absorbed it. The institution protected its numbers, Okafor said. Knox's unit performed. In a results-oriented system, performance is the currency that buys a lot of silence. She looked back at him. What's Reeves doing? He's been on a call with Pentagon Legal since 0845. And Voss's investigation team, 4 people landed at the regional airport 40 minutes ago. They'll be on base by noon. Good. Ava straightened. What about the public affairs statement, the accident language? Okafor grimaced. That went out before Reeves could stop it. Someone in the communications chain pushed it without waiting for final approval. Reeves is furious. The damage is done, but it's also accelerated things, because now every journalist with a military beat is treating the official account as a cover-up narrative. It is a cover-up narrative, Ava said. Yes? Okafor agreed. But there's a difference between it being true and it being the public story before the investigation is complete. We needed the investigation to lead. Now the media leads, and the investigation has to chase it. Ava thought for a moment. Can Voss's team move faster than the media cycle? They're trying. He paused. There's one more thing. She waited. Knox is requesting a meeting with you. The silence stretched. His attorney is requesting it. Okafor clarified. They're framing it as a personal matter, no legal proceedings involved. Knox apparently told his attorney there's something he needs to say to you directly, and the attorney, which is interesting, is not discouraging it. His attorney is not discouraging it, Ava repeated. which either means Knox genuinely wants to say something and the attorney thinks it helps the human narrative around his client, or Knox wants to assess what you know before the formal proceedings begin, and the attorney thinks it's manageable risk. Or both, Ava said. Or both, Okafor agreed. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell them I'll consider it. Not today." Understood. She moved toward the door. Ava. He almost never used her first name. She stopped. "How are you actually doing?" It was the kind of question that deserves a real answer, even when there isn't time for one. She turned to look at him. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm doing what I know how to do. But I'll be honest with you, Pete. I didn't expect it to feel like this." "Like what?" She thought about the right word. "Heavy," she said. "Winning the right thing and watching what it costs people. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the beginning of a longer, harder thing." Okafor looked at her quietly. "That's because it is." She nodded and left. The afternoon moved in layers. Voss's team arrived at 11:45 and immediately began establishing an operational space in the East Administrative Wing that was physically separated from the base command structure. They brought their own equipment, their own secure lines, their own protocols. They were polite and thorough, and they worked with the specific efficiency of people who have done this in places where the stakes were higher and the cooperation was lower. By 1400, 4 officers had been asked to surrender their base credentials pending formal interviews. 3 were from the Fort Vanguard command structure. 1 was remotely connected to Haines through a shared posting at Bragg 7 years prior. The base felt it immediately. The way a body feels, a change in blood pressure, systemic and unavoidable. Soldiers stopped pretending to do other things and started openly processing what was happening. Groups formed and dissolved and reformed. Conversations that had been private for months surfaced in corridors and break rooms and on phones to people at other bases who called because they'd seen the video and wanted to know what was actually happening. Ruiz found Ava outside the East Wing at 1600. She had been crying and had stopped, and the evidence of it was still on her face, and she didn't seem to care. "They pulled the 2021 medical file," Ruiz said. "The one for the woman Knox hurt and Haines covered. Rosa Ewing. They have the original intake form and the amended incident report filed 3 days later. The handwriting on the amendment is different from the original, and the amendment removes all reference to the mechanism of injury." Ava was quiet. "Someone physically altered a medical record," Ruiz said. "Not digitally, by hand, and then filed it." "That's obstruction," Ava said. "At minimum." Ruiz wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Not from grief. From the specific exhaustion of someone who spent years being told they were wrong about something they were absolutely right about. Voss's team found it in 40 minutes. 40 minutes, Ava. It was just sitting there." "I know. It was sitting there for 3 years." Ruiz's voice finally cracked just once, and then she pulled it back. 3 years, and nobody looked. Ava didn't offer comfort that would have been inadequate. She just stayed in the moment with her. Sometimes that's the only thing that's honest. After a moment, Ruiz straightened. "What do we do now?" "We keep showing up," Ava said. "Every morning, we show up, and we do the next thing that needs doing, and we don't let them make this smaller than it is." Ruiz nodded. She looked steadier. Not better exactly, but steadier, which was what the moment actually required. At 1800, a notification arrived on Ava's phone from a news alert she'd set up the night before. The headline read, "Pentagon source confirms internal investigation opened into Fort Vanguard command structure. Senior officer named." Below it, a subheading Major General Clifford Haines reportedly under review in connection with multiple harassment allegations and possible obstruction. Ava read it twice. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked to the window of her room in Building C and stood there for a minute. Just a minute. Watching the base in the last light of the day, she thought about what Voss had said the previous night. That she would be called reckless, excessive, a political operator. That pressure would be applied in ways that didn't look like pressure. She thought about Haynes at an airport the previous night, boarding a flight away from the thing he had spent years helping to build and protect. She thought about Knox in a hospital bed requesting a meeting with her. She thought about Corporal Vance sitting at her desk at 5 in the morning, staring at evidence that nobody had asked for, holding it because she didn't know what else to do with the thing she knew. Her phone buzzed again. Okafor. A text, 3 words long. Haynes turned himself in. She stared at the screen. Read it again. Then one more text arriving 30 seconds after. He didn't go to his attorney. He went directly to the nearest military installation and surrendered his credentials to the base commander. His aide says he made a statement. Just one sentence. Ava typed back, "What sentence?" The response came after a pause that felt longer than it was. He said, "I knew. I always knew. And I did nothing." Ava looked at those words for a long time. The base outside her window went on doing what bases do at the end of a long day. Lights coming on in buildings, soldiers moving between structures, the sound of dinner shift beginning somewhere across the yard. It was ordinary, and it was not ordinary at all, because somewhere in a military hospital, Knox was waiting. And somewhere in a formal investigation room, a woman named Rosa Ewing was finally giving the statement she'd kept inside herself for 3 years. And somewhere on a secure line between Fort Vanguard and Washington, the kind of conversation was happening that would reshape policies not just here, but at installations across the country. And none of it, not a single piece of it, had been inevitable. Every piece of it had required someone to decide that the right thing mattered more than the safe thing. Ava set the phone down on the desk beside the 2 folded notes and the empty space where the USB drive had been. She thought about Knox's request. She thought about what kind of man asks for a private conversation when his world is collapsing, and what the difference is between a man who wants to manage the collapse and a man who finally wants to stop pretending. She didn't know yet which kind of man was waiting for her answer, but she was beginning to suspect that Knox himself didn't know either, and that more than anything else about the situation was the thing she didn't have a protocol for. Part 5. The hospital room confession. She answered Knox's request on the morning of the 3rd day, not because she was ready, not because she had run out of other things to do, because the investigation had produced enough work to fill 3 more weeks and showed no signs of slowing. She answered it because she woke up that morning with the clarity she sometimes got after difficult sleep, the kind that cuts through the accumulated weight of a situation and shows you the thing you've been circling. Knox had asked for her specifically, not for Voss, not for JAG, not for his attorney, who by then was managing a situation that had expanded far beyond what any attorney could reasonably contain. He had asked for Ava, and every time the request had come through Okafor over the previous 2 days, it had the same quality. Not strategic, not managed, something rawer than that. She texted Okafor at 0612. Set up the meeting, today. His response came in 40 seconds. Hospital has been notified. They'll prep a private room. 2 hours. She put the phone down and sat on the edge of her bunk for a moment, doing the thing she did before operations that required a different kind of readiness than physical preparation. She got still. She got honest with herself about what she was walking into and why. Knox had tried to permanently injure her in front of 500 people. He had spent 6 days systematically attempting to humiliate her, and by extension, every woman whose experience she now represented in a way she hadn't asked for and couldn't put down. He had enabled alongside Haynes and others a culture that had ended careers, altered medical records, and pressured women into silence for years. She wasn't going to that hospital room to forgive him. She wasn't going to provide comfort or absolution or the kind of reconciliation that lets a person off the hook for what they've done. She was going because there was something in his request that had been eating at her for 2 days, something she couldn't name until that morning when the clarity came. He wanted to tell the truth to the person who had made him face it. And she understood from her own experience in rooms where truth was the last thing anyone wanted to say out loud that sometimes you have to be present for that moment, even when the person doesn't deserve your presence. Because the truth itself deserves a witness. She dressed, went to the mess hall, ate breakfast alone. Ruiz sat down across from her halfway through without asking. She had a coffee and dark circles under her eyes, and the specific focused expression of someone who had been doing important work on not enough sleep. Voss's team found 3 more files last night, Ruiz said. 2 from 2021 from 2019. The 2019 case is the worst one. A female staff sergeant reported a direct assault. The investigation was closed in 9 days with a finding of insufficient evidence. The officer who closed it was transferred to a senior position in D.C. 4 months later. Ava set down her fork. Where is she now? The staff sergeant. She left the army in 2020. She's been reached. She's willing to talk, but she needs time. Ruiz paused. She said she's been waiting for something like this. She just didn't let herself believe it would actually happen. Ava picked her fork back up, finished her eggs. How are the others holding up? Vance is exhausted but solid. She's been helping Chen's team cross-reference the documentation. She has a memory for dates and details that's almost frightening. Ruiz almost smiled. The woman missed her calling as an intelligence analyst. She didn't miss it, Ava said. She's been doing intelligence analysis for 14 months, just not in an official capacity. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Where are you going this morning? You have that look? What look? The one you get when you've decided something. Ava looked at her. Knox's hospital. Ruiz was still. Why? Because he asked, and because I think he has something to say that matters beyond his attorney's strategy. He tried to cripple you. Yes. And you're going to go sit with him. Yes. Ruiz looked at her for a long moment with the complicated expression of someone trying to decide whether what they're witnessing is wisdom or something they don't have a framework for yet. Then she said, "Be careful." I will. Not of Knox, Ruiz said. Of what comes after. Conversations like the one you're about to have a way of becoming the version of the story people remember. Make sure what happens in that room doesn't get used to simplify what actually happened here. Ava looked at her with something close to surprise, not at the content of the warning, at the person delivering it. Ruiz had walked into the JAG office 3 days ago as a woman who'd been made to feel invisible for 2 years. The person sitting across from her now was nobody's background character. You're right, Ava said. Thank you. Ruiz nodded and drank her coffee. The drive to the military hospital took 22 minutes. Okafor drove. He didn't speak much, which was one of the things Ava had come to appreciate about him. He understood the difference between company and noise. At the hospital entrance, Knox's civilian attorney was waiting. His name was Gerald Fitch, and he looked like a man who had been awake for most of 3 days and was managing it through expensive coffee and the particular professional composure of someone who has seen worse situations than this one and gotten paid to navigate them. He extended his hand. Ava shook it. I want to be clear about the parameters, Fitch said. Nothing said in this room constitutes a formal statement. My client is not waiving any rights by speaking with you. This conversation is private. I understand, Ava said. I'm not here in an official capacity. Fitch studied her. May I ask why you agreed to come? Ava looked at him steadily. Because your client asked me to. And because I've found that when someone who has done what he's done specifically asks to speak to the person they did it to, they usually have something real to say. And real things deserve to be heard. Fitch held her gaze. He was a defense attorney. He had spent his career navigating men who had done terrible things and managing the story around those things. He knew when someone was performing, and he knew when someone wasn't. He stepped aside and let her through. Knox's room was at the end of a corridor. A military police officer stood outside the door, noted Ava's credentials and stepped back. She went in alone. Knox was propped up in the hospital bed with his leg in a fixator, a complex frame of metal pins and rods that held the bones in alignment while they began the long work of reconnecting. He looked reduced, Not in a satisfying way. In the way that real injury reduces everyone, stripping away the physical confidence that people like Knox build their identity around. He looked at her when she came in and didn't say anything for a moment. She sat in the chair beside the bed, folded her hands, waited. He said, "You came." "I said I would." He looked at the ceiling. Something moved through his expression. Not pain, the physical kind, was clearly being managed by the medication, something older than the injury. "I've been practicing what to say," he said. "For 3 days. I had whole speeches ready." He stopped. "None of them sound right now that you're actually here." Ava said nothing. She had learned years ago that silence was not empty. It was a kind of invitation, and some people needed it more than they needed a response. Knox looked at her. "I didn't hate you because you were weak." "I know," she said quietly. "I hated you because of what you made me see about myself." He said it flatly, without performance. "Every time you didn't react. Every time I pushed and you just stayed. It was like looking in a mirror and not recognizing the face." He paused. "I've spent 18 years building a version of myself that I could live with. And you walked onto this base, and in 6 days you made that version fall apart without even trying." Ava looked at him. "What version was that? The one where I'm the hard man who tells hard truths and demands hard standards? The one where I'm making soldiers better by breaking them down?" He exhaled. "The one where what I was doing to women here was discipline, not what it actually was." Silence. "What was it actually?" Ava asked. He took a long time with that. She let him take it. "Control," he finally said. "I needed to control what I was afraid of. And I was afraid of anyone who didn't need my approval to know their own worth." He looked at the fixator on his leg. "Women like you. Women who could do the job and knew they could do the job and didn't need me to confirm it. That terrified me. Because if you didn't need my validation, then my validation wasn't the thing that determined who belonged here. And if that wasn't the thing..." He stopped. "Then you weren't the authority you'd built your life around being," Ava said. He looked at her. "Yes." Another silence, the kind that has texture. "The kick," Ava said, not as an accusation, as a question. Knox's jaw tightened. "I knew I was losing. Actually losing. In front of everyone who had ever believed I was unbeatable. And I felt myself disappear, like the whole identity just. And something took over that wasn't strategy or training. It was just rage. Pure panic dressed up as rage." He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd sat down. "I wanted to hurt you. I want to be honest about that. I wanted to make you pay for showing people what I was." Ava held his gaze and didn't look away. "And instead you showed them anyway," he said. "Just by standing there after. Not celebrating. Just standing there like it was exactly what you'd expected, and you found no pleasure in being right." Ava was quiet. "Because I didn't," she said finally. "There's no version of this where I wanted to be in that ring with you. There's no version where I wanted to be the person who broke something in public and had to watch 500 people process what that meant. I came here to do a job. You made yourself into the obstacle." Knox looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I know about the investigation. Haynes, the files they found, the women." His voice changed. Got quieter. "Ewing, I heard they reached her." Ava said nothing. "What I did to her," Knox said. He stopped, started again. "What Haynes and I did. That was the moment I crossed a line I can't come back from. I knew it when it happened. And I chose to cross it anyway because I'd already built a system where I never had to face consequences, so crossing lines stopped feeling like crossing lines." He paused. "It just felt like exercising authority I'd been given by a system that had never once said no to me." Ava sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Okay. Are you saying this because it's true, or because your attorney thinks a display of remorse serves your legal position?" Knox blinked. Then something happened in his face that was entirely unguarded. It might have been the most honest thing she'd seen from him since she'd arrived at Fort Vanguard. He almost laughed, not at the question, at himself. "Fitch told me not to say anything that wasn't in the prepared statement," he said. "Everything I've said to you in the last 10 minutes is not in the prepared statement." "I know," Ava said. "That's why I'm still sitting here." Knox looked at the ceiling again. "I'm going to lose everything. My career is gone. The investigation is going to find everything there is to find, and there's a lot to find. I'll probably face criminal charges for Ewing's case and possibly others." He said it with the flatness of someone who has already done their accounting and accepted the number. "And I think what I need you to understand is that I'm not telling you any of this because I think it changes what I did. I know it doesn't." "Then why?" Ava said, not challenging, genuinely asking. "Because you're the only person in this situation who I believe will hear it for what it is," Knox said. "Not as strategy, not as performance, just as a man who spent 18 years building a lie and finally ran out of room to maintain it." Ava looked at him for a long time. "I hear it," she said. She stood up. "Mercer." She stopped. "The women here, Ewing, Park, all of them." His voice dropped. "I know saying I'm sorry is worth nothing against what I took from them." "No," Ava said. "It isn't." "Then what does a person do with that? When the apology isn't enough, and nothing ever will be?" She considered this seriously, because it deserved a serious answer, and not a comfortable one. "You cooperate fully," she said. "Every file, every name, every incident you covered or enabled or looked away from. You give all of it. Not strategically, not in exchange for consideration. All of it. And then you spend whatever time you have left doing whatever good you can manage in whatever space you're given." She paused. "Not because it fixes what you broke, but because it's the only honest thing left to do." Knox looked at her. "That's it," he said. "That's all there is." "That's all there ever is," Ava said. "After the damage is done." She walked to the door. "Lieutenant?" She looked back. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for the ring, for all of it. The whole 6 days and everything that preceded it." Ava held that. "I know," she said. "Then, cooperate with the investigation. All of it." She left. In the corridor, Fitch was waiting. He looked at her with the careful expression of a man trying to read a situation he was not given full access to. "How was he?" Fitch asked. Ava looked at the closed door. "Honest," she said. "For the first time in a long time, I think." She walked to the exit and didn't look back. In the car, Okafor waited without asking. She got in. He drove. 3 minutes of silence, and then, "Well, he told the truth," Ava said. "All of it, or as much of it as he's been able to find inside himself so far." "Does it change anything?" Ava looked at the road ahead. "It changes what kind of man he is at the end of this. It doesn't change what he did." Okafor nodded. They drove back to base in the morning light, and Ava felt the conversation settling into her the way important things settle not comfortably but permanently. Like the way a scar settles. Present, unignorable, part of the landscape of you. The next 3 weeks moved with the speed and force of something that had been held too long in too small a space. Knox gave a full cooperative statement to Voss's team that ran 11 hours across 2 days. He named every incident he could document. He named officers who had knowledge. He named the JAG officer from 2022, a man named Major William Dresser, who had been persuaded through a combination of career pressure and personal loyalty to Haynes to close the investigation prematurely. Dresser reached at his posting in Germany, confirmed the account without being asked twice. He had apparently been waiting for someone to ask. Haynes entered a police agreement that involved full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. His cooperation produced documentation reaching 2 additional bases and 3 commands outside Fort Vanguard. The investigation expanded in ways that nobody who had started it had initially predicted, not because the corruption was exceptional, but because it was institutional. It had the particular resilience of things that have been normalized across enough systems and enough years that the participants had stopped identifying it as corruption and started calling it culture. Senator Diaz's committee held 3 hearings in 6 weeks. Ava was asked to testify at the first one. She prepared her statement over 2 nights, read it into the congressional record in 11 minutes, answered questions for 2 hours, and declined every media interview request before and after. The transcript of her testimony was read into the record of the second hearing by Senator Diaz herself, who said before reading it, "I want this body to understand that the woman who said these words asked nothing for herself. She asked specifically and repeatedly that we focus not on her, but on the system that made her presence necessary." Rosa Ewing testified at the second hearing. She flew in from Virginia and sat in front of the committee and told the truth she had kept inside herself for 3 years, in a voice that started careful and precise, and by the end was simply human. Simply a woman saying what had happened to her in a room where it was finally safe to say it. Afterward, in the hallway, she found Ava. They had not met in person before this moment. They had spoken twice on the phone. Ava had given her the same thing she gave everyone who came forward: honesty about what the process would cost, assurance that the documentation was real, and the quiet consistency of someone who showed up every time she said she would. Ewing looked at her and said, "I almost didn't come. This morning I almost got back in the cab at the airport and went home." "What stopped you?" Ava asked. "I thought about Vance," Ewing said. "I don't know her, but I know what she did. 14 months of keeping records alone, not knowing if anyone would ever care. And I thought if she can do that, I can do this." Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll make sure she knows that." Ewing nodded, straightened her jacket, walked out into the afternoon. The policy changes began at the end of the first month and accelerated through the second. New protocols for harassment complaints that bypassed direct command chains. Mandatory third-party review for any investigation involving senior officers. A formal advocate program providing independent legal support to soldiers filing complaints before and during any official inquiry. The integration program Ava had come to Fort Vanguard to participate in was restructured entirely with oversight that would have made Knox's manipulation of the tournament impossible. None of the changes were named after Ava. She had specifically requested that. When Voss mentioned it in their final meeting before she returned to active duty, he said, "Most people in your position would want the recognition. Most people in my position didn't do this for recognition," Ava said. Voss looked at her across the table. "What did you do it for?" She thought about Vance at her desk at 5 in the morning. She thought about Park with 8 years in the Army gone in 2 weeks. She thought about Ewing on a flight from Virginia, with her hands probably shaking in her lap, and her voice probably rehearsed, and her courage probably enormous and unwitnessed. "I did it for the people who already knew the truth and were told it didn't matter," she said. "I did it so that the next time someone on a base somewhere knows the truth, they have an easier time getting it to a place where it can actually do something." Voss was quiet. "You're going back to DevGru," he said. It wasn't a question. "Next week. No book deal, no speaking circuit, no news magazine profile. No." He studied her. "You know the story is going to keep getting told without you. Your name is already out there." "I know," she said. "People can tell whatever story they need to tell. I know what happened and why. That's enough." Voss leaned back. "Mercer, in 40 years of naval service, I have met a small number of people who I would describe as genuinely uncorruptible. By recognition, by pressure, by comfort, by fear. A very small number." He paused. "You're one of them." Ava looked at him. "I don't know if that's true," she said honestly. "I just know that when I look at the women who held the truth for years without anyone asking, I don't have the option of treating what I did as remarkable. It cost them far more than it cost me." She stood, extended her hand. He shook it. She was at the door when he said, "One last thing." She stopped. "Vance has been asked if she wants to move into a formal intelligence analyst role. With the advocate program, permanent position. Ava turned back. She said she'd think about it, Voss said. I think she'll say yes, but I thought you should know. Ava stood with that for a moment. Thank you, she said, for telling me that. She left. On her last morning at Fort Vanguard, she got up at 0430 and ran the track alone in the dark. 4 miles. The same pace she'd run the first morning she'd been there. It was cold, and the base was quiet, and the track was empty, and she ran the way she always ran, methodical and present, not thinking about what was behind her or what was ahead, just moving forward. 1 foot, then the next. Vance was at the Building C entrance when she came back in. She looked like she'd slept. Better than she had in months, maybe. I heard you're leaving today, Vance said. This afternoon. Vance held out something, a folded piece of paper. Ava took it, looked at her. Open it later, Vance said. On the plane or something. Not now. Ava put it in her pocket. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, in the early morning quiet of a base that was already fundamentally different from the one either of them had arrived at. You're going to be okay, Ava said. I know, Vance said. And this time, unlike the first time Ava had said something like this to her, she said it like she meant it. Ava nodded once. Went inside. She packed in 20 minutes. Said goodbye to Okafor in the parking lot, where he shook her hand, and then pulled her into a brief firm embrace and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Said goodbye to Ruiz, who had a new assignment starting the following month, a training coordinator role with the Reformed Integration Program, and who looked for the first time since Ava had known her like someone occupying the right amount of space in the room she was standing in. She rode to the airport in a base vehicle with a driver who didn't know her story, and spent the ride talking about his daughter's soccer game, which Ava found genuinely restorative. The clean normalcy of someone else's ordinary life. On the plane when they were airborne, and the base was behind her, and the ocean was ahead of her, and the next mission was waiting in the files she hadn't opened yet. She reached into her pocket and unfolded Vance's piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. 11 names, women she'd never heard of. Below each name, a base location and a date. And at the bottom in Vance's careful handwriting, these are the ones who came forward after seeing what happened here, who hadn't come forward before, who said your name when they called. Ava looked at the list for a long time. 11 names. 11 women at 11 bases who had been holding something and had found in the 37 seconds of footage from a combat ring in Fort Vanguard something they hadn't had before. Evidence that the truth could find a place to land. She folded the paper, put it in her breast pocket, pressed her hand flat against it the same way she had 6 days and a lifetime ago before she'd ever walked into that ring. Outside the window, the ocean passed below her, enormous and indifferent and completely unconcerned with what humans did to each other on the small pieces of land that broke its surface. She looked at it for a while. Then she opened her mission files and went back to work. Because that was who she was. Not a symbol. Not a story. Not the woman who broke a man's leg in front of 500 people, though the world would tell that version for years. She was a soldier who understood something that the loudest, most decorated, most protected men in any institution never wanted to learn, that the most dangerous person in any room is never the one making the most noise. It is the one who has decided quietly and completely that something matters more than their own safety, and who has already proven they mean it.